The Man Who Wasn't There is a 2001 neo-noir directed by the Coen brothers, and it came out in a weird time in the Coens' filmography. Oh Brother Where Art Thou came out the year before and is generally well regarded, but not nearly as well regarded as their prior film, The Big Lebowski. And it would take a few more often forgotten releases until 2007, where they remind us what they're really made of, with No Country for Old Men.
How's that?
Just tend to win everything, call it.
The Coens' filmography of this era is often forgotten when discussed nowadays, but I believe that there's still a lot to dig into, particularly with this film. I think this film gives us a great blueprint into how the Coens perceive the world, and how the Coens perceive the audience. The plot of The Man Who Wasn't There is a bit complex, but I'll try and summarise as briefly as I can. The film revolves around Ed Crane, a barber who seems like he's very happy in life, saying,
"You might say I had it made."
Who tries to get into the dry cleaning business by blackmailing Tony Soprano into giving him the startup money. Tony is shagging Crane's wife, Doris, so it seems fair. Tony is a proud married war veteran, so if this got out, he'd look like a gabba fool. Tony isn't too pleased with Crane when he finds out about the situation and tries to whack Crane, but Crane whacks him back. Crane's wife, Doris, gets the blame for the murder and is sent to prison. Crane and Doris' brother, Frank, give the barbershop to the bank in order to pay for the lofty lawyer fees of Freddie Riedenschneider, the best in the business for getting somebody out of a case like this. Riedenschneider gives this speech.
You want to test something, scientifically. How the planets go around the sun, what sunspots are made of, why the water comes out of the tap. Well, you got to look at it. But sometimes you look at it, your looking changes it. You can't know the reality of what happened or what would have happened if you hadn't have stuck in your own goddamn schnoz. So there is no what happened. Looking at something changes it. They call it the uncertainty principle.
Because apparently Tony Soprano isn't a proud war veteran, never actually seeing combat. So how can Doris be tried for murder if we can't even know such a simple thing about a man? Doris kills herself before the case comes to trial, and Riedenschneider is pretty peeved at this. Crane then becomes interested in the piano playing of Birdie, a young girl who...
The girl had talent. Anyone could see that.
And he decides that it is his job to make sure she makes something of her talent. Turns out this French guy who can see talent tells Crane that she stinks.
Stinks.
Bummer, right. Crane goes home disheartened. Birdie seems okay with the situation. She tries to please Crane by picking something up off the floor. Crane gets angry at this and they crash a car. Crane comes to the news that he is arrested. Turns out the dry cleaning guy got whacked by Tony and Crane is getting the blame. Riedenschneider says he'll help out as a favour for Doris's case. All goes well until Crane gets whacked, not by Tony but by Frank. Riedenschneider changes his mind about helping out and Crane goes to the chair. Also there's a UFO. Not really sure about that one. I say The Man Who Wasn't There is a neo-noir, and it does have all the signs. A complex branching story, black and white filming, a stone-faced man giving a sarcastic and often eloquent narration, and a sort of detective. Yet despite all this, I think what The Man Who Wasn't There does differently both makes it not a noir and instead something special. But to understand that, we first need to understand noirs and the French. Noirs typically follow certain rules in their narrative. For one, cause and effect. Consider the time in which noirs became popular, the 30s and 40s. Film was very popular in this era, but wasn't really considered art yet, at least not high art, and experimentation was rare amongst Hollywood because of this. Audiences wanted narratives they could understand. Granted, they didn't expect to be hit over the head with every narrative point, but they expected at least a little cause and a little effect. Take for example, in the noir classic Double Indemnity, Walter meets Phyllis because he is a salesman, Walter gets the hots for Phyllis because she is sexy, and I think they have sex. Here we can see that what is shown on screen matters. Audiences tend not to enjoy watching a film that has no meaning with random elements that don't turn up later. We have enough randomness in our real lives, we assume that there will be some kind of form or structure to our film. And yet The Man Who Wasn't There isn't like this at all. Crane kills Tony and Doris gets arrested. Crane tells the truth to Riedenschneider and we expect him to be tried, but it doesn't happen. We expect Riedenschneider to do his whole speech about atoms and stuff, but Doris is dead. We expect Birdie's piano played to lead somewhere, we expect Crane to be arrested for either the Birdie situation or the Tony situation, but instead he's arrested for the bold dry cleaning situation. The more you expect, the less you receive. The complete opposite of what you expect from a noir. Two men called Albert and John Paul had a similar sort of reading on the world. I've walked past a few Waterstones in my time and I've spoken to a man in a turtleneck once, so I know a thing or two about existentialism. From my understanding, Albert believed that if you go searching for meaning in life, you will never find any, ultimately driving you insane, as what man seeks is diametrically opposed to what the world is. Writing in his book, The Myth of Sisyphus, man stands face to face with the irrational. He feels within him his longing for happiness and for reason. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. Crane feels exactly this. He has faced so much randomness, yet expects to find reason, such as within Birdie. Within her pure soul and obvious talent, he expects to find meaning in life, except what he really finds is that she stinks and she isn't that innocent at all. In a similar way of opposing noir conventions, John Paul said that we will never really be able to understand the world around us, or what everyone else perceives or thinks, but we will be able to understand our actions, saying, Il n'y a de reality que dans l'action. Basically what he means is the only thing that matters is action. We can see this constantly throughout the film. When he tries to rectify his past or when he feels remorse, it is ultimately futile, because his actions have already had their effect. We as the audience expect to find reason in Crane's life, yet we only find the absurd. We understand his actions because of his narration, yet the result of his actions oppose everything we expect to see. We are thrown into this world of the absurd. The stone-faced detective doesn't solve the case and wrap up all the loose ends. The stone-faced barber sees a UFO and goes to the electric chair. Not exactly a noir convention. So instead of this noir story being a story of how a stone-faced detective unravels a complex narrative, I feel it is more a story of how everyday people deal with the constant unravelling of the absurd before their very eyes.
Sometimes knowledge is a curse, Ed.
For example, take Tony. Instead of Tony being concerned with the city's water supply or something, he tries to find meaning in philandering and racketeering, yet ultimately dies. Instead of Doris walking into an office smoking a cigarette, she does the same as Tony, as well as turning to the bottle, ultimately dying. Incidentally, she, just like those French fellas, doesn't believe in God. Instead, Crane says,
Doris wasn't big on divine worship, and I doubt if she believed in life everlasting. She'd most likely tell you that our reward is on this earth, and bingo is probably the extent of it.
Further lamenting her hedonism as a method of sedation to avoid trying to understand the absurd. Walter likes his drinking too, but he also thinks he'll find meaning in his family tree, ultimately losing control of those that are still alive as opposed to those who are dead. Then there's Crane. To begin with, he doesn't want to find meaning in life. He's stoic and stone-faced, trying to find meaning would ruin his image. But as the world comes crashing down around him, yet he's still standing, maybe he realises that there might be a power out there, something protecting him. Maybe he is here for a reason, maybe the reason is Birdie. Maybe within life's horrors there is some purity and he is here to get the most of it. Turns out there isn't and he dies too. Wait, maybe that explains the UFO. A lot of people claim that the UFO is evidence of his psyche falling apart, perhaps a commentary on how through his macho facade he is actually unravelling in front of us. But when you consider the film as the Coens subverting the noir genre through existential thinking, the UFO makes perfect sense. Crane is writing the story to the men's magazine, trying to find meaning, trying to explain his actions to the outside world, and as he searches and searches and searches, thinking maybe he has some kind of explanation for what has transpired, he is met with something he could never expect, and will never be able to explain. The UFO. So I propose The Man Who Wasn't There isn't a noir at all. In a noir we expect results. We expect A to lead to B resulting in C. But yet what we get is A leading to nothing, B resolving itself off screen, C coming out of nowhere for no reason. The Man Who Wasn't There is an anti-noir, or a bizarro noir, or like a Rion. I haven't decided on a name yet. But The Man Who Wasn't There takes all our expectations, everything we want in a film, and throws us an existential loop. We are a modern man, just as Crane is. For all our expectations, we are left with nothing. And maybe that's why the film is often forgotten, remembered sort of averagely. Christopher Orr wrote of the film, "There are in short many very good elements to The Man Who Wasn't There, but after a promising first half, the movie gradually veers off course. Its escalating tragedies are neither genuinely moving nor diffused with comedy, leading to a decidedly numb and unsatisfying film experience. There is a lot to admire here, but the movie is ultimately far less than the sum of its pieces." Mr. Orr came into the film expecting something. Maybe he expects noir conventions, maybe he expected the Coens to continue with the way he perceived them, or maybe he just didn't like the film. That's possible. Either way, I think The Man Who Wasn't There is a fascinating film that, despite not being a noir, deserves to be remembered in the canon of the genre due to its subversion, but also remembered in the Coens filmography as it shows that the Coens can write a script that grips you and surprises you, while making you think complex thoughts. And if you don't believe me, just listen to what they have to say about it.
All this stuff is actually in retrospect, but, it sounds plausible, and the French like it.